Welcome to this edition of the local campaign. For the next hour, you will have a chance to question the candidates from Etobicoke Centre. Here's a quick view of the riding itself. Etobicoke Centre is bordered on the east by the Humber River, on the west by Etobicoke Creek. A little north, it's just north of Etobicoke Lakeshore, and it's south of Etobicoke North, as you might well expect. And now we're going to meet the candidates in Etobicoke Centre, and in alphabetical order they are Ted Opitz, the Conservative Party of Canada, Borys Wrzesnewskyj from the Liberal Party of Canada, and Katarina Zoricic from the Green Party of Canada. All right, and I should tell everyone that if you have a question for the candidates, you call 416-446-7090. Send your email questions to torontovotes@rogerstv.com. Our question, of course, is, what is your question for the candidates of Etobicoke Centre? Please observe this rule. Do not call if you volunteer or work for any candidate in this election campaign. Give mere mortal voters a chance tonight to ask the questions. All right, let's have some opening thoughts from each of you. First, Ted Opitz. Go ahead, please.
I will serve Etobicoke Centre in the same spirit that I have served Canada for the past 33 years in both the military, part-time and full-time in the reserves. My regiment has a motto, non nobis sed patriae, not for ourselves, but for our country. My parents are Polish immigrants that came here after World War II, having experienced Nazi forced labor and Soviet gulags. My father later served in the Polish Second Corps. They impressed upon me the need to serve in order to protect. I have learned much from the Ford family in our community in that to serve the community well, phone calls must be returned and assistance must be provided. My friends, I look forward to bringing the representation that Etobicoke Centre deserves as your next Member of Parliament.
All right, thank you very much. Next candidate, Borys Wrzesnewskyj.
Fellow Canadians, we live in the best country on the planet, Canada, and one of the most livable cities in the world, Toronto. Yet over the past few years, middle and lower income Canadians have found life a little more stressful. Seniors are losing their pensions when creditor banks making record profits are lining up for another portion of $6 billion of corporate tax breaks. Gifted students' aspirations are hitting a hard wall of exorbitantly high tuition fees. Afghan war vets are walking wounded, are not receiving the post-traumatic mental health services they require as the government prepares to spend $30 billion on untendered stealth attack planes. Prime Minister Harper prorogued, padlocked the House of Commons, the people's voice, and his office has shut down parliamentary committees. We have a duty to do better. Canadians deserve better. This election is about fiscal prudence and restoring Canadian democratic values.
Thank you. Next candidate, Katarina Zoricic.
I'd like to thank Rogers Television and Mr. Goldhawk for hosting this debate tonight. I'm quite honored to have the opportunity to debate with the respected candidates running in Etobicoke Centre. I'm excited to share the Green Party platform, which is designed to create and maintain strong economies, strong communities, and true democracy. I believe we are at a juncture as a riding and as a nation where we need new ideas on the economy, on health, and especially on the environment. Lastly, as a young Canadian, I am tired of the lack of foresight in Ottawa and saddened by our inability to engage youth. These ideas are addressed in the Green platform, and this is why I'm so proud to be representing the Greens in this election.
Okay, thank the three of you. I should tell everyone that Ana Maria Rivero, the New Democratic Party candidate, was unable to be in the studio. She will join us later for a couple of minutes on the telephone. Thank you all for your opening thoughts. We already had an opening thought about the jets, so can we start there? Ted Opitz, what about these jets? Well, what are we to know about these jets? What do we need to know about the jets?
Well, the first thing you need to know is that these jets, we have to give our men and women in uniform the best equipment possible. These are aircraft that are required to serve for a great length of time. 30 to 40 years is their expected lifespan. The CF-18s flying over Libya right now will reach the end of their lifespan in about 10 years' time. And we have to prudently replace those aircraft, and we need to make sure that our men and women in uniform, especially the people that fly them, have the best possible equipment.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah,
that's it as far as you're concerned.
Sure.
Katarina, what about the jets? What are your thoughts?
I believe that the F-35s are not cost-effective or built for Canadians. We have a large large geography to overcome, and we need two-engine planes. That what they were designed for, and the F-35s only have one engine. They are costing us billions and billions of dollars, and so I believe that we need to go through a competitive process to replace the F-18s.
Okay. And Borys Wrzesnewskyj, what do you say? I mean, you've already mentioned briefly the price tag that you're using.
$30 billion.
$30 billion.
And my goodness, the biggest contract in Canadian history, and we didn't even tender. These are untendered. We started off with $6 billion, went to $12 billion, went to $16 billion. We're at $30 billion. That's $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. That's what happens when you have a government that goes about awarding untendered contracts. And what's most disturbing, it appears these jets won't even work. I've got here the United States Government Accountability Office Congressional Committee's report. Joint Strike Fighter, additional costs and delays, risk not meeting warfighter requirements on time. And in the conclusion, what does it say? Cost increases, schedule delays, and continuing technical problems also increase the risk that the program will not be able to deliver the aircraft quantities and capabilities in the time required by the warfighter. Given all these challenges, moving forward with the current plan for ramping up production does not seem prudent. That's what the United States has decided.
All right, but in the alternative, what would the Liberal Party do? Would you? First off, the contract hasn't been signed yet, right? Am I not right about that? The contract is yet to be signed to actually go ahead. But if not those jets, you got another jet in mind. Well, I guess people would like to know.
Yeah, there's a whole family of different types of jets that are available. But what we're saying is this was untendered. So we're saying put a hold on this. Don't keep rushing forward. We're up to $30 billion. Let's step back for a minute before we ding taxpayers. $1,000 for every Canadian. Let's step back, take a look. Are these stealth fighter planes really the jets that we need? There are all sorts of different planes available out there. Let's step back, look at the price tag. It's reached a point where it's not affordable.
Let's come back to you on that, Ted.
Actually, that's not entirely true. It was the Liberals that began this tendering process with the Joint Strike Fighter when they were in power, and they liked it then. They just simply don't like it now. This is an aircraft that...
well, they're not the only ones who don't like it, to be fair.
Well, they may not be the only ones that like it, to be fair, but this is an aircraft that has to look out over Canadian skies for the next 30 or 40 years. The tendering process is in place. There is only, by the way, one Joint Strike Fighter. That is the only fifth-generation fighter in existence to this time. And the 16 billion...
In other words, that means simply, in citizen talk, that all countries will be... There'll be a number of countries that will be flying the same jet.
Well, and you have to be interoperable with your allies. We have international commitments to meet. And as the Prime Minister said the other night, I mean, we're not even paying for these aircraft until they start arriving in 2016 and after.
What about the whole notion, and in this whole debate, which has been going on for some time now, until the election campaign began, I never before heard that one of the considerations and drawbacks was the fact the F-35 was a single-engine aircraft. Has that been, and you raised it, Katarina, a number of other candidates have raised it in recent days.
It's not a drawback.
Is that a consideration?
No, they're very reliable.
Well, I guess it is if that one engine goes out, and if you had another jet with two engines, theoretically,
well, you need to
you might be better off. I don't know.
But you look at the F-16, examples of the F-16. It's a highly reliable fighter. It has a single engine.
There's a reason that a number of our NATO allies have put a hold on this. Never mind the United States saying, hold on, we need to revisit this.
Well, not the whole government. Certain agencies are saying that, to be fair. Yeah.
The Turks have put a hold on this. And they were looking initially of approximately 100 of these planes. Denmark's putting a hold on this. So a number of our allies have said, something's seriously wrong with this particular program. We need to stop and take a close look at the costs and the capabilities.
All right, let's shift gears here. Here's Kevin calling from Etobicoke Centre. Kevin, do you have a question for the candidates?
Yes, I do. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
My question is, how long, if someone calls your MP office, how long would it take for someone to call you back with the complete answer, and how would you stop the gravy train?
Okay. All right. There's Kevin with a typically Toronto question. Turnaround of calls. I mean, would you have a, let me ask you this, Katarina. If you were the MP, would you have a policy for how quickly you return calls?
I believe that you should have a policy. You're representing your constituents, therefore you have an obligation to get back to them as quickly as possible. And you also have an obligation to look into issues as much as you can. And so I think that you should definitely get back to them at least within a few days.
And I think Kevin is seeing some form of gravy train-ism in Ottawa. Would spending be an important part of your priorities?
I think right now, with the G8 spending that we're seeing, and it was uncounted for, we need to do something about our spending habits.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Borys, what about that?
Well, $1 billion for a G8, G20 summit, which was basically a glorified photo op. All the decisions had been made ahead of time. $1 billion. It's absolutely, the Canadian taxpayers are going to be paying for this for a long time. But it's time not just to stop the gravy train here in Toronto. Let's stop the Harper gravy train in Ottawa. Let's take a look at what's happened. We've seen a huge increase in the bureaucracy in Ottawa. Since Mr. Harper has come to power, there is an additional 33,000 jobs for the bureaucracy. He's spending $3 billion more on outside consultants than the last Paul Martin government. Paul Martin's last budget was $175 billion in 2005-2006. This last budget, with no stimulus funding, is $279 billion, $100 billion more. Let's take a look. Indian Northern Affairs has 1,280 more employees. That's a 32% jump in employees. Have conditions improved on reserves? No. Human Resources, 8,000 additional jobs, 47% higher. Now, I believe in personal example. The Prime Minister's office, Mr. Harper's office budget has increased by 30% since Paul Martin's last
that's enough of it. What about the other part of the question?
Train in Ottawa.
All right, okay. Well, but the other part, hang on, the other part of Kevin's question was about returning telephone calls.
Yes, and I have a bit
What kind of a policy do you have there?
Sure. What I used to do is I used to drive to Ottawa when the weather was permitting. I'd drive and use the Bluetooth to answer calls, and usually within a week to 2 weeks you'd be able to filter through all those calls. Because you have to remember, people are in Ottawa Monday to Friday. So I'd have a call list, and that 4-hour drive would allow me to catch up with those calls. Once in a while, there are really heated issues that come up.
I'm sure.
And when that happens, you know, there can be days where you get 200 communications. And it becomes almost impossible to return within that those calls within that time frame. So sometimes people call, leave a message. If they ask for a return call, it's separated.
Well, why would they call and leave a message if they didn't want you to call back?
Oh, people do specify. Say, you know, this is what I think on this particular issue.
I just wanted you to know, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly,
okay.
exactly. Right. And sometimes they say, well, we want to know from you how you're going to vote on an issue or what your thoughts are on this particular issue. And then obviously you have to call back.
Get to the Bluetooth. Ted Opitz, a number of things here for you to cover.
Well,
your choice on where you'd like to start.
I'll first cover Kevin's question, and I'm glad Borys eventually got to it.
Okay.
You know, I've learned a lesson from Rob Ford. You try to return a phone call within 24 hours. And that's what people really like to hear.
You think as an MP you can return a phone call within 24 hours?
I will try my best. That may not always be possible, but at least an acknowledgement of your phone call saying your phone call's received, the MP has it, he's going to return your call as soon as he can. That's important. In fact, going door to door, that's one of the biggest complaints I've heard about
People are still talking about that, aren't they?
That's right, and that's the biggest complaint I've heard about Borys's constituency office is that they're not responsive and people haven't got a lot of help out of them.
Now, what about all of Borys's notations about gravy train situations as far as Borys is concerned? How would you answer that?
Well, it's a lot of liberal rhetoric.
The numbers speak for themselves. $279 billion of expenditures in this budget. The last Paul Martin budget was $175 billion. Mr. Harper has increased federal spending by $100 billion. Look at that $50 million.
Okay, all right, let him finish.
The thing about this budget is it was a very good budget. The deficit would be balanced. The budget would be balanced by 2014. There was a tremendous number of measures in that for all Canadians. It was the coalition, of which Borys is a member, that forced an unnecessary election, and we're paying. What
coalition would that be?
Well, the Liberal NDP bloc coalition.
But there is no coalition today, right?
Not presently,
There's no coalition
but
today.
if past behavior dictates future behavior, they'll do it again.
Okay, all right, okay. All right.
And that's a budget that, if re-elected as a stable conservative majority government, we will table once again and make sure that all those tax incentives for families, for people, for small businesses, and balancing the books on the deficit will happen by 2014.
Okay, all right. Let me take some more questions here. Sure. We'll rejig and try to get on an awful lot of area to cover. I understand that. And an hour, believe it or not, isn't that long, right?
Fly.
Here's Donald calling from Etobicoke Center. Donald, you have a question for the candidates.
Yeah, good evening, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Sure.
As a longtime resident of Etobicoke Center, you know, I've observed an awful lot of confusion of late, and I'm of Ukrainian descent, so in the Ukrainian community and certainly in the Polish community, there's been an awful lot of confusion with respect to policies of the various parties for family reunification and the issues associated with immigration, and et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, I think there's a lot of nonsense that's being spread as to what the real true story is. So I'd like for the record to have all three of the participants state what their policies are and what their performance has been for the Liberals when they were in government, and for the Conservatives who've just been in government for the last 5 years. What is the story around immigration and family reunifications?
Immigration, in particular, family reunification. Okay, Donald, thank you very much. Borys Wrzesnewskyj, let me start with you.
Sure. We've seen a significant drop in family reunification under the Conservative government. Approximately, I believe it's about 10,000 per year. Most recently, I was able to, through a third-party access to information request, get the specific information this gentleman is asking about.
Pardon me.
This Conservative government prides itself in talking about family values. Well, what happened to family values with family reunification? When I got the quota document, the quotas set for Warsaw and Kyiv for parental and grandparental class reunification, it was 25 for Kyiv. I get more requests in my riding, and 5, you can count it on one hand, 5 for Poland. Now, I raised that question in the House of Commons. I raised the question in parliamentary committee. Since then, the number has been readjusted for Poland by Minister Kenny up to 50. That's great. There's an additional 45 parents or grandparents that will be able to join their families here. But I still believe that that's inadequate for a community that's 1 million strong in Canada, and the 25...
Well, what's a more appropriate number if the Liberals were in power? What do you say?
Well, the numbers were significantly higher, and let's take a look at some of the other...
So you'd make them higher again if you had the opportunity, your government would.
And we would also take a look...
Is that what you're saying? Yes?
Is that the numbers, yes, of course.
All right, okay.
Yes.
All right, just
and if you,
want to be clear, that's all.
Yes, yes, and if you take a look, it's just perplexing why in certain places you have parental and grandparental reunification numbers of 2,500, 2,800, and then in others, it's a handful, especially when you have communities that are...
Large communities here? Is that
exactly,
yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
It just doesn't make sense unless there's some sort of political motivation.
Okay. Ted Opitz, you want to comment on that?
Borys's figures are entirely wrong. First of all, when he's talking about Poland, in 2005, processing time for parents and grandparents was 31 months, and now it's down to 14.
I wasn't talking
about time.
Hold on, I'm getting there.
Right,
and
okay.
in 2009, Poland received 325 family class applications, approved 305. Last year, 217, and approved 229. And it's the demand that drives the numbers. In Ukraine, in 2005, the Liberal government had 28 parents and grandparents. In 2010, the Conservative government let in 288. And again, the processing times, and which is important, came down from 34 months to 25 months. But let me remind you that last year, the Conservative government let in 280,000 immigrants to this country, the highest in about 55 years, I believe. And about 179,000 of those were family class.
Okay, let me come back. Katarina, I haven't forgotten about you, but I want to give Borys Wrzesnewskyj a chance to reply to these numbers. Sure. You were well prepared for this question, weren't you?
Because he had said it in Parliament, and the Honourable Jason Kenney corrected him.
So you figured it was coming down the pipe. All right.
Well, the Honourable Jason Kenney didn't correct the numbers. He didn't answer the question and had to, a few days later, adjust the numbers.
What about the number conflict here?
There's a document, and I have a copy of the document. It's from the ministry. It was received through an access to information request. The quota set in January of this year for 2011 for parents and grandparents from Poland, you could count it on one hand.
You're talking quota. He's counting actuals. Isn't that the?
No, he's talking about actuals from past years and going back. I'm saying for this coming year.
But that's last.
No, I'm talking about 2011. The quota set for 2011.
Okay. All right. Well,
the quota will be somewhere in approximately the same. It's the demand that
the quota will be similar to the figures you released.
It's the demand that drives it, and the department sets those. And the figures are, by the way, received from the department. We don't make these things up.
Okay. All right. Katarina, what about this? Immigration policies particularly, Donald wants to know about the family reunification policies that are afoot out there.
Well, in the coming years, I don't know exactly what the numbers are. These two gentlemen.
Neither do we after we've heard from both of them, okay? So join the club.
But the reality is that Canada has an aging population, and our immigrants are going to become, in 20 years, 30 years, a very, very, very valuable asset to Canada, and we cannot have a backlog with family reunification. We have to be letting immigrants enter the country, and even more than 280,000, I believe.
But in particular with family reunification,
yes, absolutely.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's hear from Diane calling from Etobicoke Centre. Diane, do you have a question for the candidates?
Yes, I do. I'd like to just take a pause for a second and think about the citizens here in our own neighborhood. And we are in Etobicoke Centre, which is a very aging population. I'd like to know what their plans are for our seniors as they age and need nursing homes and need care and need financial support. What are their plans?
All right, Diane, thank you for that question. Ted Opitz, would you lead off, please?
In our budget, we had additional funding available in the Guaranteed Income Supplement for our seniors. That was unfortunately not able to be passed at this time until we regain a strong Conservative majority government. Those measures will be on where healthcare is intersects with this. Our government will, of course, continue on with healthcare funding and increase that by 6% a year, as the Prime Minister stated the other night.
After 2014, when the current one expires. All right. Okay. Borys Wrzesnewskyj, Diane's concern is older Canadians.
Yes.
What can the Liberals do for older Canadians?
Well, first, let me address this so-called supplement to the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors that are living in poverty. The fine print in the budget said the only seniors that would qualify were those that had an annual income of $2,000, including CPP, or less. That pretty much eliminates everyone. That's $165 per month. So they're almost bamboozling seniors with that. What we've said, and they have a track record for this. The previous election, they said they wouldn't tax income trusts. What happens? One of the first things they did was put a tax on income trusts that eliminated so many thousands of Etobicoke seniors' nest egg that they had for retirement. We've promised $700 million into guaranteed income supplements for seniors. And
how does that play out for an individual? Can you give us a rough idea? Those big figures don't mean anything to us unless we can translate it a bit.
I believe it comes out to somewhere between 125, of course, dollars per month. But of course that varies, depending on the number of seniors that fall into the category that they qualify for GIS.
All right.
But there was a second part to Diane's question.
Well, care facilities, health facilities, all that sort of thing.
Exactly. And that's one of our top 5 priorities. In fact, it was number 1. We have an aging population. Many of us are going to have parents and grandparents that we have to take care of. And we'd love to take care of them in the dignity and the warmth of a family home. And it's actually fiscally prudent because it comes at a fraction of the cost of institutionalization. So what we're saying is, instead of 6 weeks, we provide 6 months of EI benefit to families so that they could provide for those family members at home when they're requiring that sort of care. And in fact, when you take a look at the savings between institutionalization and taking care of people at home, it ends up being a situation where you're not actually losing money on this. And like I said, it's with greater dignity. Now, the situation currently is that many people have no choice but to send their aging parents or grandparents into institutions, because if you take a look at the stats, the vast majority have incomes of under $45,000 that take care of parents, aging parents and grandparents at home, and many of them have to go into their personal savings. You know, I believe there's a better way of doing this, and Canadians are more compassionate than the current situation would allow.
All right, thank you. Katarina Zoricic, what about these issues as they face senior Canadians? What would your party
The Greens recognize that this is a big problem, and we fully support home care. We need to develop a more cost-effective post-op recovery care to reduce hospital costs and to reduce wait times. We also need to ensure long-term care facilities are available that so much needed hospital beds are not misused for those, such as seniors with dementia, Alzheimer's, needing residential long-term care.
Okay, all right. Let's have another question from Betty, calling from Etobicoke Centre. Betty, do you have a question for the candidates? Betty, are you there?
Yeah, oh yes.
Go ahead, please.
I'm listening to you on the television.
Well, I'm right here. Go ahead, please.
Well, I'd like to know where Ted, I can't pronounce his second name, but where is he?
Well, he's right here.
Well, I know he is. He's there.
Yeah.
This is the first time I've ever seen him.
Yeah.
Because I don't see anything, I don't see him around. He never comes to the door. I never see any posters about him, literatures about him. Oh, there's lots of things I'd like to ask him, but for goodness sake.
Well, he's right here. Ask him that question. He's right here. Ted Opitz. He's right here.
Yes, I know he's right there.
Okay, well
Where
then
is
ask
he?
him.
Where is his, oh, you know, I'm 88, and I get confused, and I get rushed out of this thing.
You don't sound very confused to me. You want to know where the Conservative candidate is, right?
Yes.
All right.
Where is he?
Well, all right, let him explain where he is and what he's doing out there.
I bet he's in the basement listening to his rec room or something.
No, not at all, ma'am. I am making it from home to home to home. I've been going from door to door to door since this campaign began. I will get to your home, I promise. My signs are getting out there. My literature is getting out there. It is a large riding, but I am covering it very quickly, and I promise to get to your home. And if you want me to visit you soon, you can call our campaign office at 416-233-6111. Don't tell me on the air where you live, but let one of our staff know that, and I would be more than happy to come and visit you.
Dave, get Betty's telephone number, and we can try to give it to Ted Opitz before he leaves. Dave is saying okay, so we can help you make that that direct connection. Now, since I gave you time on that, let's talk a bit about door knocking and going door to door. How many doors do you endeavor to knock on in any given day or during the campaign? Do you have a goal? Well, does anybody have a goal, or?
Sure, we try to hit about 600 to 700 doors. It depends on the weather, of course. And
600 to 700 doors, what?
In a day.
In a day. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Yes, that's correct. And but there's another aspect to Betty's question. And first of all, Betty said that she's 88 years old, so let me take this opportunity to thank Betty and all seniors who've contributed so much to building this great country of ours.
You're going for Betty's vote too, aren't you?
You know, but our seniors too often...
Betty, he wants your vote too, okay?
Yeah, our seniors too often aren't thanked for all the hard work over decades that they put into building our communities. And Etobicoke Centre is where I grew up. I moved, or our family moved there when I was 2.5. I grew up there. I've lived in Etobicoke all my life. My businesses are based in Etobicoke. I've been involved with community organizations.
Okay, now let's not go to a long list. Okay, we get it. Katarina, how would you reply to Betty's lament? What kind of campaigning are you doing in the riding?
We're a little bit smaller scale than the Conservatives and the Liberals. We don't have as many resources, but...
Money, I think you mean money? Yes, all right, okay.
Or firepower with the amount of people.
Yeah.
But we are trying our best. We're going out every day. We're just trying to reach as many doors as we can. It may not be 600 or 700, but we're going until our legs are sore, we can't talk anymore. And
You're all going to be very physically fit at the end of this, right? Or at least more fit than you are now.
2 belt notches so far.
All right,
So
well, there you go.
A silver lining to this.
Fitness is good.
Okay, all right. Here's Mary calling from Etobicoke Center. Mary, do you have a question for our candidates here?
Yes, I do, and thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
My question refers to Canada's foreign policy and our international reputation. I'm referring to our present role in Afghanistan, our loss of seat on the UN Security Council, our undemocratic behavior during the G20, our reduced funding to Africa, and the list goes on. How will you restore Canada's tarnished reputation of democratic integrity and our role as peacekeeper so that we can have a Canada we are proud of again?
All right, well, there's a very loaded question, Mary. I'll give it to Ted Opitz first off.
In fact, our reputation is sterling in the international community. Our international partners believe that Canada is an outstanding partner to have, both militarily, both in trade organizations, and so many other international bodies that we are a part of. I mean, part of that goes to the OECD and the IMF talking about Canada and its economic prowess right now being one of the greatest in the G7 today, and that speaks to the leadership of Mr. Harper and Mr. Flaherty. We have led internationally in Afghanistan. We're leading the mission in Libya, and in Libya that was an issue where Canada had to meet its international obligations to prevent a humanitarian disaster on a massive scale. Our trade relationships, we've now signed 8 free trade agreements. I think the Liberals in their time only did 3. We're still negotiating with 50 countries. The EU and India are going to be huge partners for us. And in the eyes of the world, we are a remarkable country.
Borys Wrzesnewskyj, how would you answer that question?
Well, you know, during my student days in early youth, I had the opportunity to backpack through some 40, 50 countries on various continents, and I always had a Canadian flag on my backpack. And it was amazing. It didn't matter if you were in North Africa, Latin America, when people saw that Canadian flag, they always extended a hand, a warm hand of friendship, smiles greeted you. Unfortunately, that reputation that we used to have, Canada used to punch above its size when it came to international relations.
What does that really mean when people say that?
Well, you know, we had this incredible Pearsonian legacy of peacekeeping. What an incredible innovation that Mr. Pearson came up with, to use soldiers as peacekeepers, men and women in uniform as peacekeepers. And we were the country that championed the Landmines Treaty. We were the country that championed the responsibility to protect. And these days, unfortunately, that voice has been diminished. I've heard in conversations that, you know, we don't really need to find out Canada's position. All we have to do is find out what Washington's position is. Canada used to have an independent and a strong voice internationally.
Well, if you formed the government, how would we know the difference in terms of all these things that are going on internationally? I think that's what the caller's really driving at. What differences would there be?
Well, first of all, we have a Foreign Affairs Department, and I have to tell you, they are some of the most polished professionals in the diplomatic corps that you'll find. And they're demoralized today. They've been hammered by the Prime Minister's office. In fact, last summer, they were given certain phrases that Foreign Affairs couldn't even use. They were told child soldiers is no longer a phrase that could be used. And when you demoralize your frontline workers, it doesn't help you to have that strong voice. When you cut off your peace-building work in places like Africa.
This is all what you perceive as happening now. What would happen with the Liberals before I move on to Katarina?
Well, we'd rejig the direction of our involvements, our foreign involvements. We would once again involve ourselves in peacekeeping missions, peacemaking missions around the world, as opposed to wars.
Peacemaking or peacekeeping? I think people see a big difference between those two.
Absolutely, and it's evolved.
But I mean, there's a huge difference, isn't there?
It certainly has. For instance, in Haiti, we had a peacekeeping mission in Haiti, but that was basically almost like a constabulary that we provided. It depends in each set of circumstances, the type of mission that we have. So peacekeeping has evolved from that point where it used to be a row of soldiers that separated two warring factions. We saw in Darfur the incredible role that we played there. We had brave Canadians that were providing logistics.
I don't want this to occupy all the rest of our time, but you're saying, in essence, if I can boil it down a bit, Katarina, I'm coming, peacemaking and peacekeeping, you still see those as roles for Canadian soldiers, right? Yes?
Absolutely, and our diplomats, All
right, okay.
Those roles,
back to you, Ted Opitz.
Well, the Canadian Forces is a multi-role organization. We have a particular role in Afghanistan, as when I served in Bosnia, we had a particular role in Bosnia under the stabilization force, and before that, the implementation force, and then before that, UNPROFOR. That's just one of the roles that we do. And to Borys's point earlier about Canadian flags, I wear one on my uniform, and that's there's no prouder moment than doing that. So you can't categorize the Canadian Forces in one particular Pearsonian, pie in the sky, mid-60s kind of thing. I mean, that was the era of Trudeau when he almost destroyed the Canadian military, and now it was the Conservative government of Canada that put pride back in the military and put purpose back in the military and helps the Canadian military help the Canadian government achieve its international aims.
All right,
with its international
let
partners.
me move on. Katarina, the original question was, it was placed this way, kind of politically, how do we restore Canada's reputation in the world? So I'll let you start from that point.
To start off, I think that most Canadians feel it's embarrassing that we lost our seat in the UN. And
the Security Council.
Yeah, in the Security Council. Yeah. And although we did do a good job in Haiti, we responded well to that. We have not responded to African peacekeeping needs. We were asked to provide, the UN asked us to enter the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we failed to respond to that. And I think, especially Africa now, when more investment is going into that continent, we need to play a larger role there.
What does the Green Party policy say about such things?
That's exactly what we think. We think we need.
Oh, all right. You're reflecting that in the policy.
And it's also what I believe.
All right. Okay. Well, that's a nice coincidence, isn't it? Because you're a member of the Green Party, of course. All right. Let's get some more questions on here. Here's Nick calling from Etobicoke Centre. Nick, do you have a question for the candidates?
Hi.
Hi.
I've lived most of my adult life here in Etobicoke, and I've been really happy with all of the people who run for positions, simply because of the fact that I thought that their behavior was very ethical. And I don't really know Mr. Opitz, but I've been reading a little bit on the web, and it sort of bothers me that when Mr. Opitz ran in Mississauga South, he was accused of actually going out and buying out domain names of other nomination contestants simply to divert traffic away from them and redirect it back to his own website. When they confronted him with it, he promised them that he would no longer use the redirecting sites method. Even his party scolded him when they came back and said that I think that people will use this to judge the character or lack of character with this individual, and this is not the way we feel conservative candidates should
but this is another campaign in another riding, right?
Yeah, but here comes the question.
That's what I was kind of keying to. All right.
Yeah. And even in today's paper, the comment about the Arab Federation and how, they were literally, in a way, unethically used. What does Mr. Opitz, is he going to use such tactics here in Etobicoke Centre? And what do the other candidates think of unethical behavior by politicians? Because I personally think that it sickens me.
All right, Nick, thanks very much for that. Let me come to you first, Ted.
First of all, I had no knowledge of that email being sent. I do not support the characterization or content of that email. And
did it come from your campaign?
Yes, it did.
It did,
and this individual is no longer with our campaign.
Okay, no longer with the campaign.
And as for
those who don't know what's going on, this was an email that is now in circulation. It's all over the place now, as I'm sure you know, Ted Opitz. And it's an email from a member of the campaign team, the Ted Opitz campaign team, and it's asking to create a photo op about the multicultural groups that support Ted Opitz. The opportunity is to have up to 20 people in national folklore costumes which represent their ethnic backgrounds. These people will sit in the front row behind the PM Great TV photo op. We're seeking representation from the Arab community. Do you have any cultural groups that would like to participate by having somebody at the event in ethnic costume? And I guess this relates to a visit by the Prime Minister on Thursday? Is that what that's about? So what was your reaction when you heard about that?
I found out about it at the same time everyone else did. Obviously, I didn't know about this email until that time.
What did you think when, but I guess what I'm driving at, what did you think when you heard about it?
Total surprise, of course.
Yeah.
And again, I don't condone the characterization or content of it, and that gentleman is no longer with our campaign.
All right. Okay, fair enough. Now, Nick also brought up this other issue about domain names on the internet. I don't know if you want to address that. Go ahead.
Well, I'll just address it quickly. This was a very contested conservative nomination at that time.
It was a nomination battle.
It was a nomination.
All right.
I ultimately lost that nomination, but what did I do? As a result, I went and campaigned with the winner afterwards.
Okay. All right. That's all right. Okay. And Nick wants everyone, I guess, to talk about ethics in politics, so I open the floor to both of you. Katarina, let me come to you first.
Well, quite frankly, I believe that there has been it's been disgraceful a little bit, the politics that's been going on in Parliament, and I think a lot of people are upset with the way that their candidates and their elected members of Parliament have been acting. I strongly believe in cooperating and representing your constituents to the best of your ability, and I don't think that type of behavior is acceptable.
Okay. Borys Wrzesnewskyj, what would you like to say about all this?
Personal example matters, as I mentioned when I spoke of the ballooning budget in the Prime Minister's office. But it's interesting because this individual who's mentioned as a staff member was not just any individual on the campaign team. It turns out that he was in fact the campaign manager, the most senior person on Mr. Opitz's campaign team. And it speaks to a pattern. We saw Minister Kenny's communications just before the election that went public, where he referred to groups as ethnic and very ethnic. We see the campaign manager for Mr. Opitz's campaign in a denigrating way for many multicultural communities, saying, well, if you wear your ethnic costumes, we'll line you up in the first row. It's just unacceptable.
Every party lines up. However, every party lines up people behind the leader. That's a fairly common tactic, isn't it?
People come up, but if you wear your so-called ethnic costume, we'll put you in the front row. It's somewhat demeaning. But what I'm curious about is Mr. Opitz seemed to have hijacked other conservative candidates' websites to redirect traffic to his own website.
Okay, we're now talking about a campaign, a past campaign,
yes,
all right?
And I of course worry. I don't want to see that sort of tactic and that sort of unethical
I'll come back to Ted Opitz for a final thought on that, then we're going to move on to something else.
If we want to talk about mistakes, you know, I could talk about Borys in 2006, where he said we should negotiate with Hezbollah, his entire party, including Scott Bryson, including Carolyn Bennett, including the interim leader at the time. All chastise him for that.
I didn't open up the door so that you two guys could squabble back and forth.
Nor do I want to.
However, Borys Wrzesnewskyj made additional comments about what he called the hijacking of domain names, I offer you the opportunity to come back and defend that statement, and then we'll move on. If you like, it's up to you.
I didn't hijack anybody's domain names. You know, I bought some domain names at the time. It turned out not to be a particularly good idea, and didn't work. I lost, and as a consequence, I took the high road, and I campaigned with the winner.
Okay, fair enough. All right, okay. Let's move on. Here's another phone call. We've got Jim on the line from Etobicoke Centre. Jim, do you have a question for the candidates here?
Yes, I just want to talk about, there's been a lot of talk about corporate taxes, and you know, one of the Liberal Party's proposals is to increase the corporate tax rate when we're in the midst of the fragile economic recovery. And quite frankly, that concerns me when you have a lot of, you know, prominent economists who have said that, you know, with capital being very mobile, you could lead to a significant job loss and loss of investment. In some cases, you know, one, Jack Mintz, who's one of the most prominent, you know, authorities on this topic, has said that it could lead to 200,000 job losses and billions of dollars in lost investment.
Mm-hmm. Do you work for any... Let me ask you this, Jim. Do you work for any candidate or volunteer for a candidate in Toronto?
No, I don't.
You don't? Okay. All right. All right.
Yeah. So basically...
I'm just checking because you know our rule about that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just asking a simple question, which is in the news all over the place about corporate taxes.
Okay.
And you know, and you also have, you know, previous Liberal governments have supported, you know, corporate tax reductions like Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin. So I just want to know why now Mr. Ignatieff is supporting a complete reversal of those policies in a fragile economy.
Okay, I'll start there. Borys Wrzesnewskyj.
Yes.
Well, we're all familiar, I think, with your basic platforms here. You want to stop the downward spiral of cuts to income tax at a predetermined spot right now, not continue with that. Maybe you could tell us why.
Well, we don't want to reverse. What we're saying is this most recent round of corporate tax decreases aren't necessary. Canadian corporations are already advantaged when you compare to American corporations. We have an integrated North American market, and when people look to locate in North America, they'll take a look and say, my goodness, in Canada you have 15 to 25% lower corporate tax rates. You have a healthcare system, whereas in the States, although they're trying to introduce it, you have to pay for your employees' healthcare. We already have those advantages. And I know Mr. Harper, and especially his finance minister,
We're running out of time. Can you capsulize some of this a little bit?
Sure. Instead of $6 billion to corporations hoping for trickle-down, let's give it to hardworking, middle, and low-income Canadians.
Okay. Let's hear your side on that, Ted.
I'll be briefer.
Okay.
This was in fact, these corporate tax cuts were first agreed to in 2007, and the Liberals voted for them. This is the final phase of that implementation. Yeah. And within Jim Flaherty's budget, those corporate tax cuts will increase jobs. We've already, since 2009, achieved an extra 480,000 jobs, as the caller correctly points out, that Jack Mintz is suggesting if we take
Can anybody ever quote anybody aside from Jack Mintz? He's the only guy who ever gets quoted on this. Do you know of other economists who say the same kind of thing?
I'm sure there are, but I don't
I'm sure there are too, but I just never hear anybody except the name of Jack Mintz.
But he's one of the leading economists. And he's saying that if we do that,
they'll hear from Jack Mintz, that's for sure.
You know, the Liberals will cost us 200,000 fewer jobs that lost. And that's going to impact families at the end of the day.
I think middle-income and low-income Canadians are sick and tired of hearing Jack Mintz. They're the ones that deserve a break.
Yeah, but what kind of line, but the problem is, and we can't figure it out, what kind of line exists between income tax cuts up to corporations and jobs? Or if you stop the cuts to a lack of jobs.
And that's
the string that people get hung up on, don't you think?
Exactly. And that's the sort of trickle-down theory of big corporations. But if you look at the past 2 decades, big corporations have been shedding their labor forces. It's the small and medium-sized business sector, especially the small business sector, that are the innovators and job creators. And perhaps we should look at
they're still corporations, so it would help them.
Let's look at perhaps restructuring our corporate tax rates. There's some of that in the system already. But progressive taxation, like we have with income taxes, how about applying it to the corporate sector?
Okay. All right. Katarina, what are your thoughts on this, the corporate income tax cut issue?
I would first like to mention that the OECD report said that a 19.5% corporate tax rate would still be extremely competitive among the OECD countries. And I think a problem with...
In other words, there's room to go back in the opposite direction is what you're saying. All right.
And a problem with these corporate tax cuts is that corporations are unlikely to open new jobs, but instead to accumulate cash, to pay off debt, and to increase dividend payouts to their shareholders. And another statement that I'd like to make is that the IMF came out with a statement.
The International Monetary Fund, go ahead.
That our household debt also remains too high. So perhaps Mr. Harper is lowering the taxes on the wrong in corporate instead of
personal income tax. Is that what you're saying? Can I come back to you then for further comment?
Well,
Ted?
I would say the Liberals are going to tax ordinary people, and that's ordinary families.
No, we're not.
And
Aren't they taxing corporations?
Not but they're going to raise taxes all across the board. We're trying to lower taxes for families.
No, hang on. Hang on. Let's be clear about that. You're talking. I thought it was all about corporate income tax, not personal income tax.
Well,
you're saying raising all taxes?
Well,
I don't get it.
Raising the corporate tax rate is going to cost people jobs, is going to cause higher unemployment, and that's going to be on the backs of Canadians. So let me clarify that.
All right, okay.
Where the IMF is concerned, the IMF is saying Canada is the best place to do business in the world right now. So if you want to open a business, come to Canada. That's what the IMF is saying.
And what do you say to that? The IMF, in fact, is saying things such as that, fairly positive.
And
that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a very good thing. In fact, we don't lose that advantage by shifting this back. We still have over 15% competitive advantage when you compare with the United States. In fact, only the UK has a marginally lower corporate tax rate. But what's also important here is the big corporations. You know, Mr. Flaherty crows about how we've exited
I'm almost out of time here, so...
Okay, this recession, we've come out better than all the G7 countries. Corporate Canada, they've had record profits. The average Canadian is working longer hours since the 1950s and is further in debt. It's the average and working class Canadian, middle class and working class Canadians that need the break.
Here's the other thing about this argument, and other economists, I'm not going to quote Jack Mintz this time, say that if you stop the corporate income tax cuts, that does not mean the money is going to be there, because corporations will naturally find other ways to avoid that tax, putting into action other policies so that the money wouldn't be there for the government to use anyway. Does that make sense?
Well, I'd have to read that report.
Oh, all right, okay.
But I'm going...
All right. It's a very complex issue, isn't it?
But,
and the rest of us are whirling around here trying to figure it all out. But that's our job. We're the voters, right?
Indeed.
Okay. Okay, closing statements from each of you. Katarina Zoricic, let's go with you first, please.
The Green Party brings the best from fiscal conservatism, the strongest commitment to social democracy and ecological conservation. If you want to put a fresh perspective in Parliament, if you want to make a difference, if you want to restore the respect and civility in the House of Commons, if you want to have a positive solution for the future of your children and grandchildren, vote Green on May 2nd.
All right, thank you very much. Borys Wrzesnewskyj, go ahead, please.
Fellow Canadians, we need a fiscally responsible government that rewards hard work and ingenuity, a government that's compassionate to our seniors in their golden years, to students as they dream of the future. We must restore decency to public office and provide the inspirational vision and policies to fulfill Canada's promise. Our vision must be of an industrious and just Canada, at peace with herself and at peace with the world. A Canada that shines as an inspirational beacon to all of humanity.
Okay, thank you very much. And Ted Opitz, your thoughts for this evening.
My fellow constituents in Etobicoke Centre, since coming to office in 2006, the Conservative government has been implementing a low-tax plan for jobs and growth. We have come through the worst recession since the 30s, and Prime Minister Harper has steered Canada to be, through these times to become one of the best performing advanced economies in the G7. International bodies like the OECD and IMF agree. But recovery is still fragile, and the next phase of Canada's economic action plan tabled by Minister Flaherty last month, a low-tax plan for jobs, growth and families, have been delayed because Mr. Ignatieff and his coalition, including people like Borys, have caused an unnecessary and expensive election. Our plan here for Canada will be passed if Canadians re-elect a stable, conservative majority government for the next 4 years and not a reckless coalition.
Okay, we have a reckless coalition. All right, we have a few seconds left over here. What's the mood of the voters out there? I'm sure I'm going to get different kinds of answers. Katarina, what do you think? What's the mood of the people you're talking to?
It's split. Some are quite appalled by the actions of members of parliament and frankly don't want to go out and vote on May 2nd. So it's been quite hard to get them to change their minds. And others are feeling quite optimistic and hopeful and engaged in what is going on.
You getting doors slammed in your face from time to time?
Occasionally.
Yeah. Boris, what's your experience?
It's interesting. I think in the second week, we're noticing that people are finally engaging and looking at the substantive issues, and that's quite encouraging in an election campaign. And I look forward to the coming weeks to discuss those.
And the mood you're seeing out there, Ted?
I'm seeing a tremendously positive mood. People are upbeat. I'm seeing an awful lot of support for Mr. Harper. They aren't disenchanted with Mr. Giantif.
Thank you all very much for coming in, taking time out from your campaigning. That's it for now. We'll see you soon.